Welcome into the DNVR Gaming Podcast, brought to you by WGT Golf. You can download it totally for free today at DNVRGolf.com. I'm your host, Drew Kreisman. Joining me, as always, is the DNVR Avalanche crew of AJ and Rudo. And on this episode, we get to celebrate some of our favorite overlooked and underrated games from the last couple of years, with the gaming awards right around the corner and us set to do our own kind of special celebration of our favorite games over the last year, several of which are games people have heard of and are very familiar with. And there's nothing wrong with loving some Final Fantasy VII and some Animal Crossing and these games that have been massive successes. But we want to give some love to those other games out there that haven't necessarily been. And we were just talking about this before we came on. So AJ, why don't you get us started with this question of, like, what even is it? Are we talking indie games? Are we talking small games? Some of these games that are, I've been playing Life is Strange lately, which is, you know, a Square Enix game, but it's also an indie game. These like subsidiaries, right? Like Fox Searchlight and stuff like that. So what even counts in this conversation?
I don't know, man. I don't know why you're asking me. I was the one asking you that before we started. I was trying to get a definition so I could figure some games out. And instead, you were like, "Come live and talk about it."
Well, what is that?
When I think of an indie game, I typically just think of a small developer that hasn't had the big hit yet. Right. Typically, you know, and when a good example, think of Larian Studios when they made Divinity 1.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm pretty sure that game was Kickstarter funded. And look at it now. Like, Divinity 2 was a massive success, and now they've been given control of Baldur's Gate. So, not an indie developer anymore, but one that turned into the success story.
What? In my mind, if something is kickstarted, I just kind of always throw it into the indie category. But then you also have games like Star Citizen, where like they've raised like $130 million, and it's like, okay, well, that's not an indie game anymore at that point,
right?
But
did that game ever come out?
It's been coming out in pieces, like bit by bit, for a long time now. But
yeah, if you've been in early access for a decade, you really regretted that year one early access, huh?
Yeah, it's rough. Definitely a little bit rough, but people got money to burn, I guess. So
man, Sunset Overdrive was a fun game.
I don't know that. Tell me, what's the elevator pitch? What is this?
It was
Vaporwave was a video game.
It was kind of Jet Set Radio meets Infamous.
Okay, I like that.
If that helps at all.
Yeah,
it had kind of those were the games that it really reminded me of, with a really good soundtrack. Right.
Well, and so here's an interesting question, right? So Beaston comes in with, are we talking about Hades? So, right, this is another one of these from that developer. They're well known now. They're very well known. They keep winning awards, and they keep, like, Bastion was fantastic. I've got Bastion, and it was one of the games I thought about bringing up. So this is the problem that AJ is having right now, right? And I think we're all having it. Is like,
yeah,
Bastion was dope, but those guys, like, everybody knows that. I'm blanking on the second one now, and then Hades
Transistor.
or the Resistor. Yes, yeah. Transistor. And like, those games are awesome. I played the hell out of Bastion. I'm told Hades is great. Once I try it, I'm sure I'll love it. But, you know, it got nominated for Game of the Year. So it's like, is that
not really indie anymore at that point?
Yeah. I mean, Supergiant Games can't really be considered much of an indie developer. You know,
right.
Certainly after Bastion, you could start to make the argument that they moved out of that. And then after Transistor, it's like, no.
Yeah.
Those were big time successes.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, can we separate underrated from underground now? Indie games get celebrated but aren't mainstream. That's a really great point. And Flyby Cygnus coming in with Ace Combat, again, a franchise everyone's heard of, but you can certainly make the argument that it's a bit underrated and overlooked. but it's not indie.
Yeah, I think the genre is probably what's holding Ace Combat back more, because there's not a lot of like dog fighting games.
Right.
And I mean that in terms of air combat, not actual dogs fighting.
You go underground
It's
enough.
not the Mike Vick game. Yeah.
Someone listening on their podcast app on their drive to work just went, what did you just say?
What do you mean? Do you like adopting dogs and training them? It's a weird game, dude.
It's a weird Nintendogs mod, man.
Very. Oh
God, I forgot about Nintendogs.
Oh boy. But yeah, that's for a very specific audience, right? But I think that is actually one of the things that a lot of the games that we're going to talk about today have in common. And one of the great things about modern gaming is that you can make something for a very specific audience, and you don't have to ship 5 million copies. You don't even have to ship 1 million copies if you don't spend that much and you sell to your audience. Like it's a tough definition to create. That's why
that's where it comes in, right? Like if you're a AAA title, you have to appeal to the general audience because of your budget, because of the price that you're sinking into it. You have to make a significant amount of money back. If you're an indie dev that, is a team of 10, 5, sometimes one guy, the return on investment doesn't need to be nearly as significant for it to be a success.
Right.
Yeah. Just talking about Supergiant Games again, they have 20 employees apparently.
Right. So
that's pretty small.
Maybe we should still consider them.
Yeah.
Because 20 employees that's 20 people making some really good games.
Yeah. Does DNVR? Well, DNVR has more than 20 employees at this point.
22 now, I think.
Much more. I was gonna say, but yeah, it's that size of company. All right. Well, let's get into a couple of our favorites, and maybe it'll become a little bit clearer what we think of as overlooked and underrated and indie and all this stuff as we go through it here. Who wants to start? Who wants to throw one in there? I started with AJ before. Rudo, let's start with you. Give us just a game that comes to your mind when you thought in the last couple of years, what was overrated or not over? We're not doing that conversation. That's mean. We're doing underrated. What needs a little more love and attention?
I don't know if I would say it's underrated, but definitely overlooked by a lot of people because of its casual aspect is the Untitled Goose Game. That game is amazing, and everyone should take the time to play it, at least for a little while.
It definitely can't be underrated. They talked about it as a game of the year last year.
I understand. That's what I said. I don't think it's underrated.
Kind of 80s category.
But I think a lot of people looked at that game and said, oh, it's super casual. It's not for me. I want to go play a real game. And trust me, it's fun. It's worth the time to go run around as a crazy goose and mess with people's lives.
Yeah, Maximum. I haven't played the co-op version of it, but Maximum Troll Life was great. And all the memes that came from it. My Animal Crossing town flag is actually the goose.
Excellent news.
Yeah.
Excellent. Cygnus asking.
You mess with the honk, you get the bonk. That's how it goes.
I gotta try it. I really do. It looks like the kind of thing I could thoroughly enjoy. Well, right, but
it's stupid, but it's more fun than Goat Simulator was.
Yeah, Goat Simulator, there was nothing to do.
So Cygnus asking, so this is kind of the thing, right? Honest question: should Among Us be considered for Game of the Year? And I know it's actually kind of old. There's this weird question about it's a little bit older, but that's one of those games that's super indie and overlooked and underrated right up until the moment where everybody became aware of it and it became this massive phenomenon, right? And so it sits right on the precipice of this question. I'm only aware of it. I haven't actually played Among Us yet.
It's an unpopular opinion, I think, but for me, of the games where you play as a jelly bean person, Fall Guys is better than Among Us.
I actually haven't played Among Us yet, but I feel like a DNVR night would be...
Yeah, DNVR squad playing Among Us would be amazing, definitely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Breckton says it sucks unless you're playing with friends and you're all drinking, which sounds like a kind of thing we could make happen pretty easily. Sounds like our kind of situation.
If you don't know, Among Us is kind of like the Mafia game that you play in person, or like Werewolves, kind of, where it's more in video gamey, right? So like the bad guys run around and murder people and try not to get caught, and then the townsfolk call meetings and they end up lynching usually themselves.
Townspeople tend to be.
It's like a conspiracy with like a whodunit, and then
yep,
you try and figure it out. It's sort of like a really screwed up game of Clue.
Yeah, kind of.
But yeah, these small games that become big phenomenons. You mentioned when you said, developers of one, a development team of one. I of course thought of Undertale, which was phenomenal, which was so super cool. And as somebody who's a fan of every game, that game was a love letter to. It was basically like, you know how we all played all those RPGs in the 90s of like not just Final Fantasy, but like Legend of Mana and Secret of Mana and all that really nerdy shit that we were into. Like, what if I just, as a single person, write a love letter to all of it? And it's an amazing game. I highly recommend anybody who's a fan of 1990s JRPGs.
If you like Earthbound.
Right. Just all that, or Dragon Warrior / Dragon Quest.
Talk about overrated, man.
I'm not a big fan of that franchise.
Earthbound is just
Earthbound.
Wow.
Wow,
that's a hot
Dragon Quest.
It's let me qualify. Earthbound is a great game.
Okay,
but it is extremely slow.
It is slow paced. That is true.
Yeah. And it can be really tough to get into, especially if you like the Final Fantasy games, which don't typically have pacing issues.
Right.
And Ness is trash and Smash. So
Chrono Trigger is a masterpiece.
Yeah. Well, and there's another example of like anyone who's played Chrono Trigger knows it's a masterpiece. But if you ask a modern gamer, what are the best games of all time? How long would it take them before have they even heard of this? This thing has gotten far enough away. It's like, but not an indie game. Overlooked and underrated? Probably. Well, actually, no, it's not underrated. It's overlooked. That's back to Rudo's thing. This is back to our Hades. Right. This is the Hades cat. So this is what we're doing, basically. We're creating categories here of types of things that are overlooked but not underrated. The Hades.
We need to. It's the video or the TV and movies have this category of cult classics.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they fall into, I think, like a Fight Club or a Firefly, things like that.
Yeah.
Where if you've seen it, it's very, very good. But the general eye hasn't picked up on it quite as much.
Right. But we got a few others in here. The original Prince of Persia, Wolfenstein 3D.
When both of those games were also, I don't know, I grew up with those, so it was like, those helped like build their respective genres.
I mean,
it's hard when you go back to like the beginning of gaming when things were still, genres hadn't been invented yet.
The best Prince of Persia was Sands of Time on the PlayStation. So,
right. I
don't
totally
even know
agree
on that one.
24K basketball, bringing up Legend of Dragoon. You could act like, and here's the thing: anything that Square Enix has made that's good that isn't Final Fantasy over the last 30 years is a little bit overlooked, and you could throw Nier into that category. I mentioned Life is Strange, which is a little more of an indie project, but they've got a lot of those offshoot things that if it's not Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts, like
it's weird now since you brought up Nier. They're in the modern video game cycle. It's hard not to consider Nier maybe not AAA, but certainly not indie or underrated because just of the hype cycle that is surrounding significant video game companies now, where they're like, this is our next big game. We're going to pump it. We're going to pump it. We're going to pump it.
Totally.
So I struggle with ones like that for sure. But
yeah,
and some of these franchises also were in Japan for such a long time.
Yeah.
That when they finally started to come over to the West, where it was like, oh, these are great. You know, you look at like Fire Emblem, you look at the Tales series. You know, first Tales game I ever played was Tales of Symphonia on GameCube.
Yeah, the game's really
phenomenal game. There's a reason that game has been released on like 5 different platforms.
Yeah,
it's a great game, arguably the best of the Tales series. And then you look at like the JRPG genre just isn't very popular the way that it used to be, and Tales continues to like dominate that genre. I mean, there's tons of Tales games. You know, they come out every couple of years, but they never get that like hype to them. But they're you know, kind of like with Michael suggesting Ace Combat. Like Ace Combat's a Bandai
right. Bandai Namco, right?
Yeah,
thank you.
Santo Ranta.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. They you know, not a small developer, but like a very niche genre that is a very like narrow lane of game development. And there's not tons of those. You know, Dragon Quest is the Dragon Quest 11. Great JRPG, but there just aren't tons of them anymore. Remember, there used to be for a while they were all over the place, and now it's just like people just don't have time for games like that.
Right. I was gonna jump into another category here, but
like was hyped on Phantasy Star Online earlier this year, but
yeah, well, and even then it was like even that's what that game's been out for like 8 years.
True.
And so it like finally comes to the West, and then you play it, and it was like, wow, this is a game development nightmare. Like games have come a long way since this was made, and they have not.
True enough. True enough.
Right.
Still a fun game, by the way.
So I think the next extension of that, and this is another thing that's happened a lot more recently, is these people that leave big companies and then go and create their own little indie development thing, and then start creating super dope stuff, right? And actually, one of the games that I wanted to talk about, one of the things that made me, you know, particularly think of this topic, something I've been playing lately called the Banner Saga. Talking about wanting some, you know, those types of RPGs that don't exist very often anymore. The elevator pitch for this game is that it's Final Fantasy Tactics meets Norse mythology, and it's very old school in its gameplay and concept. It's almost like playing a Dungeons and Dragons adventure, but it's also very fresh in its presentation and in its, you know, delivery of things like voice acting that wouldn't have existed back at the time when games like this were a lot more common. And but it's also created by, it's like an offshoot of a bunch of guys who worked at BioWare. And but it's phenomenal. It's a fantastic trilogy of games that I would highly recommend to anybody who enjoys things like Disgaea or Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Ogre, those sort of chess battle turn-based RPG.
Yeah, team fight tactics and stuff.
Yeah, like it's a genre that you just don't see a lot of games in anymore, and it can be what it's actually closer to. And it's great because I played through this game with my girlfriend, because it's also got a lot of choices that you can make and stuff, and it's like permadeath in it, so you got to be careful not to get your characters killed, stuff like that.
Emblem-ish like that,
right? And so you can kind of together like make all these decisions, and then you go and, you know, you have the little battle segment of the game, and it's so, they just don't make these types of games anymore, and you can understand why, but that they found a new way to make it cool, but in its own original way. Very, very impressive, but like, yeah, it's just some cast-offs from BioWare who really knew how to make some stuff, who got a very small budget, made a tight little trilogy of games.
I mean, is that the new cycle for like video game devs? Start indie game company, be successful, make a couple of bangers, get bought by EA or some giant company that pays absurd amount of money, make a couple of terrible games, and then all of the good developers jump ship and start a new company. Like, because it seems to happen a lot right now.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, look at the guys that made Diablo 2. a lot of those devs ended up moving over to Gazillion and helping Marvel Heroes become what it did before it, they went bankrupt and fell apart. But they remade that game from a piece of garbage into a really, really fun superhero ARPG that lived up to a lot of the Marvel license potential. And it was all the guys that made D2. They took a bunch of the D2 formula and applied it there, and then learned from some of their mistakes, and were like, hey, people should be allowed to respec on the fly so they can do different things if they want. These should not be permanent choices that screw you. And turned it into a really fun game, and then retired.
Good game devs are good game devs at the end of the day.
Right. The guys that make good games usually have good ideas. They have a good understanding of what to do. They have an understanding of, is this fun when I do it? Not like some of the stuff that you do in MMOs, which are just...
By the way, at least from our generation, I think RuneScape is the least overlooked game in history. I don't think there's a single person that went to my middle school that didn't at least log into RuneScape at one point in time.
Man, you went to a cool middle school.
I didn't play it, man.
That's mind-boggling to me, because everyone I knew had at least tried that game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was familiar with it. I had friends that played it. That's all good. It just wasn't my thing.
Totally. It's
had a bunch of friends that played Maple Story and stuff like that too.
RuneScape was way better than Maple Story ever was.
Yeah. Club Penguin.
So then there's this other category. My guy, Matt Diorio he's got a great podcast. If you're a huge video game podcast person, check out Crashing Game Night. We got to have him on here sometime. We'll definitely have him on as a guest on this podcast to talk about all kinds of stuff. He's talked to so many interesting people in the gaming industry about all kinds of fun, interesting things. But he brings up, these true indie games like Hue. I don't know if you're familiar with that, or like Ho Ho Come. These they're almost like little puzzle color games. The company that got really famous, I can't remember they did it for Sony, but the people that made Journey and Flower and Abzu, right? These kind of pretty pleasant, colorful worlds to interact with and solve little puzzles, and it's not even your standard sort of video game experience, right?
More like
it's a story more than a video game. Yeah.
It's like an interactive novel.
Yeah, but even less so like Telltale obviously is the prime example of that, right? Or even third time Life is Strange. But I think that there's something weird about Flower in particular. I highly recommend anyone who's got just a free 6 hours. I think it's free, or you can buy it for 99 cents or $1. There are these, Entwined is another one. I don't know if you're familiar with that. These it's sort of like a rhythm music game where you move these mystical creatures. One you control with the left stick, one you control with the right stick. You got to match them up with little color patterns, and then pretty things happen on your TV screen. That's basically the point of most of these games, is a small bit of puzzle challenge for a pretty release of a thing. Do you have any favorite games in that genre? We need a category for this.
I would say kind of it's a lot more gameplay heavy, but fantastic artwork plus fun gameplay with a little bit of puzzling to it. The Trine series, not you want to talk about a true indie series here. It's never been the highest selling series. It's not insanely popular, but the people who have played it really, really like it. Earlier this year, I went through it. Z and I and a friend of mine all went through it all together and basically beat it in one weekend. Not long games, but really fun and outstanding artwork. The aesthetics of the game are incredible, and they have a whole series. It's just like that, little platforming, little puzzling.
I've been very curious about those. I've seen the trailers and I've always wondered. I will check them out upon your recommendation, good sir.
You and Katie want to play something. It's a really easy game.
That's how I pull her into the video game world. Ooh, pretty art. And then, the Norse mythology and, I just got that person killed. Now I feel bad. But yeah, the pretty colors is the biggest. Let's give us some pretty
game,
colors.
You have to work together. You have to,
yep.
No fighting. No, you've got the person making the boxes has to be ready to do a lot of work.
Oh man, I love it. I'm ready. I'm in. Rudo, you got some, let's call them pretty color games.
Kind of in the same vein, Braid.
Oh, good call.
Yes. Very
much enjoyed that one. I'm always a sucker for the reversing time puzzles, to be honest.
Oh man, you're like Iron Danger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Haven't tried it.
There we go.
It was in Humble Bundle for September or October.
It's probably sitting in my Steam library somewhere.
Yeah. It is.
Well, that's how I was with the Banner Saga. I'd owned that game for 2 years because it went on sale at one point for $5. I was like, that looks cool, and it's just been sitting there. And one day you download it and you go, I'm going to try this. You go, this is awesome.
That was how I got into it. PlayStation 4 gave away 1 and 2 as part of PS Plus, and so I just downloaded it and I played through them, and I was like, oh, these are actually good games.
Yeah,
artwork is awesome in those games, by the way.
Right. Bust a move on N64. All right, Cygnus, how many Breck Brews are we in now? Now we're on to Bust a Move on N64. Parappa the Rappa, all-time underrated games. What do we Need for Speed Pro Street, the most underrated racing game of the mid-2000s. There you have it, folks.
Argue with that if I believe that.
Extreme G is the most underrated racing game of all.
Extreme G was awful. That game was terrible.
Excuse me, good sir.
Sorry, the F-Zero games deserve a new entry.
True.
Yeah. Why have we not had one of those in a while? I also, just since we're apparently just naming games now, I wanted to bring attention to 2 others. Whatever. Obviously, I'm an RPG guy. I've been playing Grand Kingdom, which I'll tell you right away is okay. But again, it's one of those ones I got for free on the PS Plus or whatever. But
what a recommendation!
So
it is okay.
It is okay. I think the battle system mechanics that they've created. Here's what's happened is there's 2 of these games that exist that I know of, and it's basically a revitalization. If anybody ever played Valkyrie Profile back in the day, talk about your underrated games. Totally different style of doing an RPG, and it's difficult to explain exactly how the battle system works, but it's extraordinarily engaging. The problem with Grand Kingdom is that it doesn't have that interesting of a lore and story, which an RPG kind of needs to be successful, right? And it appears to have been created largely for they had this idea that it could be competitive online, because the way they've set up their battle system, I could totally see how that would be a whole lot of fun, because there's a whole lot of different classes, and it's basically a combination of 3 ideas. It's that tactical, it matters how you move your chess pieces around the board. It's the RPG of it matters what their stats and abilities are. And then there's a little bit of a fighting game mechanic too. And then it matters if you can pull off the moves properly, and you need some hand-eye coordination to make it work. And it's really, really cool. But Indivisible Prototype is the game that I haven't even played, but need to recommend. And the reason is because I'm recommending it to myself. I played the free version of it that has great gameplay and no story and no lore. And it's just okay, I put my 15 hours into this and I'm done. But if it had a great story behind it that had me wanting to continue on, I could see spending hundreds of hours inside a gameplay system like that. It's really smart. So I'm going to check out Indivisible Prototype.
I feel like you just Sony needs to hire you to pitch QuickTime events after that pitch that you just gave.
I don't, I don't hate quick time events. Oh, straight up. Forget everything I just said and just go and play Nights into Dreams. 25
I don't think Sonic
years.
needs more love now.
Yeah, Sonic
No,
needs
Sonic-
anything but love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sonic just had a movie made, so I think
Yeah.
we're good on Sonic needing more love.
Sonic's doing just fine, but Nights into Dreams. All right, let's wrap it up in that general category. All-time underrated games. I don't know. Can I even say this? Untitled Chronicles. Apparently, it is underrated and overlooked because I've never heard of this. 100 Heroes looks rad. Oh, Suikoden. I've never known how to pronounce those. Did you ever play those games back in the day? Those are super underrated and dope. I've said all. I think I've named all the underrated RPGs at this point, but that was one that was a lot of fun where you have to like put together a cast of over 100 people. It's basically about recruiting your gigantic army, and it's big army battles as opposed to like 4-on-1 or whatever. But those games are fun too.
People that are fans of this series are going to hate me for saying this, but Perfect Dark, legitimately underrated because GoldenEye straight up stole the spotlight from it. And yes, there were games on PC like Unreal Tournament and things like that that predated Perfect Dark, but Perfect Dark brought legitimately difficult bots to play against to the console genres.
Mm-hmm.
They were not difficult. They were cheat holes. There was those dudes. They were too good, dude. It was unbelievable. They were too good. Seriously, Perfect Dark was fantastic, but oh my god, it was so
everything
difficult.
you wanted GoldenEye but couldn't. Wanted to do in GoldenEye but couldn't.
Yeah, because you could actually play with friends. You didn't have to play against them who were just watching your screen anyway, so it kind of sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could play against bots, but you could play competitive matches because the bots were really, really good. There were like 10 levels of them too. So you could find your spot without it being like, this is punishingly difficult and we're not having fun.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the right amount of challenge, but we're still going to win most of the time.
Didn't hate your friends at the end of it either.
Yeah. You're not trying to end friendships, man. That's what Mario Party's for.
No, those were the days. Just getting it scream out.
Speaking of underrated games, there was a game on the Wii called Dokapon Kingdom.
Yeah.
That was Mario Party-esque, except it was all the stuff that you liked about Mario Party. It was awesome, a bunch of classes. And in the end, it was all about betraying whoever you decided to side with. Oh,
Straight up ruin your friends' lives.
Yeah, it was definitely a thing that you wanted to play with your friends to test that friendship.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, as an old school gamer, there's a few I just want to throw out. Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
Oh, God. That game is so hard.
Yes.
So, like, if you fire that game up now and you don't know what you're doing,
Right.
you are not going to have a good time.
I actually did
You're
that.
you're running around the yard with nothing, and
Right.
you're like, what the hell is going on here? Oh,
Yeah.
It's game over. Got it.
Yeah. I shot all my bullets and the zombies eat me now.
Yeah. Basically, the Resident Evil formula long before Resident Evil happened.
Right. There's a game for, I think, Super Nintendo and Sega, which was like an early version of what was that Sid Meier game with where you're just like the one little critter that evolves? Spore?
Yeah.
Is that something? Yeah. There's Super
Such a
Nintendo
disappointment.
game. Yeah, it was really not great. But there's a Super Nintendo game called EVO or Evo, probably Evolve, whatever. Really, really cool, really interesting early concept version of they were trying to get to that. I would love to have seen what they could have done with a concept like that if they'd had more technology available.
Shit, original Castlevania is a top 50 game of all time.
Yeah. I don't think those are overlooked or underrated. At least I hope they're not anymore. And everyone check out the Netflix series because it's dope.
It's actually good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's
really
actually good. As a very like on stuff like that. I really liked Castlevania series.
Yeah. Anyone know Alpha Centauri?
don't. I know Civ though.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, that's not a genre I really dabble in. So.
Yeah, I don't too much either. Henry said Burnout 3. I don't think Burnout 3 is underrated anymore. I think it was when it first came out, but that's
well,
one of
racing
those
games
ones.
were a big. There was a ton of competition.
Project
when
Gotham
Burnout
was
was in
out
its heyday.
there, and there were
You
that was
remember
Gran
Midnight Club
Turismo.
Racing?
Yeah,
Yeah, you had Gran Turismo and Forza have been
Yep.
around for all of that. Need for Speed was still big. It was just a genre that had way more competition.
Yep.
And my favorite personal most underrated game of all time that I never thought got enough love, that desperately needs a remake, that there's no way this game wouldn't be successful if you executed a C- execution of it, is Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem for the Nintendo GameCube.
Oh my god.
Yep.
A game that you cannot do drugs and play at the same time. You can't
Straight
do
up.
You
It-
cannot do it.
You'll think you're on drugs playing it. So.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You will have a very, very bad night if you take any kind of
You're gonna have a bad time.
You can't do it, dude.
It is.
That's
For
not a
anyone who
challenge.
doesn't know, what's the elevator pitch for this? It is. See, that's what's difficult. Is there's not a lot of games like it, and
It's like,
You know the relief of when you think you forgot to save, but then it turns out you did save? It's like that distilled, the entire game. Like
it's like, has anybody ever offered you acid and you said no? It's like if you'd said yes.
Oh man, straight up. Yeah, okay, literally for anyone who just doesn't know what we're talking about here.
For the record, I broke my Mario Golf on the N64 because I got so pissed at that game that I broke it in half. So that game.
Right.
Go on, Drew.
Eternal Darkness is, very broadly speaking, it's a horror game. If you're not really into things that are spooky and scary and mess with you, then you shouldn't get into it. And I'm typically not. That is not my genre. There's a lot of things about that game that are genius, but probably the sanity meter is the thing that makes it most interesting. The idea that it has this, we're used to health meters and magic meters, and we played a lot of video games over the years, but as terrible things would happen to you in this game, your character would start to hallucinate, and then the game would start to mess with you. Those of you who've played Metal Gear Solid, you're close to knowing, the fourth wall breaking, how they can mess with you. But Eternal Darkness, and Metal Gear Solid's my second favorite video game franchise in the world after Final Fantasy. Eternal Darkness does fourth wall breaking and messing with the player better. It's so much screwier. And without playing it, you just don't know. But you could do this in so many, with the modern technologies, the number of ways you could mess with people by convincing them that they'd wiped their hard drive, or that their TV is turned off, or that their internet has been disconnected, or however many number of things that can, oh man, to mess with people in the modern technology. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem VR. People would go actually insane.
Yeah. That would be terrifying.
Yeah, that's actually probably a really bad idea. But I need a remake of that game. It was so smart. So smart. Toe Jam and Earl?
A good series. Those were fun games. They were wild too.
I played a little Power Stone. Any of those, any fighting game that isn't a 2D, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Soul Calibur, Street Fighter game. There's a lot of those 3D fighters that are underrated. Power Stone was fun. All right.
Fighters is another genre that just doesn't really have.
Yeah.
They've really fallen. It's crazy. Fighters, RTS, to an extent, JRPGs. People just don't. make them like they used to.
It's
There were so many of them.
just so hard to innovate in those things. Like
Yeah.
when Fighters came out with you can queue up with 3 players and rotate them when you want. That was like a big deal for Fighters.
Yeah, I mean that's what made Marvel vs. Capcom such an interesting deviation from Street Fighter, and why those two dominated the fighting game scene for such a long time.
Yep.
I love this.
Mortal Kombat went like a decade.
Straight up. I love this comment from AJ, other AJ, we'll have to call you. End of MGS2, I must have turned my system off a dozen times toward the end. Thought the system was really telling me to shut down. Same, dude. It's so messed up. I love it when a game will mess with you a little bit. And Cygnus reminding us of when rhythm games ruled the market for like a 2.5 year period, when there was a legitimate Dance revolution.
True.
Come on. It was right there.
I was I played the shit out of DDR. I went to I didn't have a home one. I went to the arcade to play it in front of crowds on a Saturday night.
Wow, you liked it that much.
Yeah, my friends and I all got into it. We did whole things in front of it for whatever reason. A bunch of people would show up at Katie Mills Mall.
Watch that game too. Like crowds just gather around that game.
Yeah.
It was right inside. It was right by where they had it. It was right by the movie theater, and it was right at the entrance of the arcade. So just walking by, you could see it. Or if there's a crowd there, look, when a crowd gathers, it just naturally attracts people.
Yeah.
And so 5 people would show up. It turned into 10 people. It turned into 20 people. It turned into I'm playing a rhythm game in front of all these people that I don't know. This is really weird.
This is the things. I can talk. It's okay. I talk for a living. It's fine. These are the things that make us gamers interesting and unique people all unto ourselves. All right. Is there anything else? Because we're going to sign off and everyone's going to go, oh man, I forgot.
Yeah. I don't know about most underrated game ever, and it did get a sequel, but its sequel came several years after the original, and there was no more steam. Like the all momentum from the franchise was gone, and I would say Company of Heroes was super underrated.
Company of Heroes 1 was very, very good.
It was so good. The story, the gameplay. If you go back and you play it now, you'll be like, this is a pretty standard game. But at the time, it innovated a lot of the ideas that ended up in it.
Squad mechanics and stuff, yeah.
I didn't know it, but boy, did it set me up for a lifetime of loving XCOM.
Yeah. Also slightly underrated and overlooked franchises. Both of those, actually.
It's hard to Fire Emblem is now massive in the West. After this last 2 iterations, it's enormous.
Right.
XCOM 2's DLC was just so good that it vaulted that popularity of XCOM 2 into a stratosphere.
Right.
Not for XCOM, but if your game has a character in Smash, I don't think you can be overlooked anymore.
Especially, and like Fire Emblem has like 9 of them in Smash.
Yeah, right.
It's a decent chunk of the raw. I think there are more Fire Emblem than Mario characters in there.
Y'all know Shining Force?
I've heard of it, but couldn't tell you what it is. Yeah,
old school, same idea. You'd love it. Both of you would absolutely. It was I think it was a Sega Genesis game. It was one of my first favorite sort of tactical RPG moving pieces around the board. Falling in love with the individual characters. Yeah, Genesis tactical RPG. That's a series that desperately needs. God, that needs to be remade. I got to move that up in the top 5. Y'all would love it. You got to check out Shining Force for sure. But there's no like modern version of it. Fire Emblem. I need to get into Fire Emblem. The day I get a Switch, I'm getting Fire Emblem.
They're coming out with the original one is coming to the West for the first time.
Really? I played one of the handhelds, and it's been so long I just cannot remember. But it's a great series that for a long time had that. same problem. We're talking like Square, non-Final Fantasy Square games, like non-Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Nintendo games had that problem for a long time too. Like, these are fun too. Fire Emblem's great.
I know we're wrapping up, but Cygnus brings up a good point here with Amnesia of a game can release to small fanfare, but if a major content producer like a big streamer like Shroud or a YouTuber like PewDiePie picks up the game and plays it in front of millions of people, all of a sudden the game can explode in popularity.
Yeah. That's one of the cool things about the modern gaming world. I was thinking the other day about, I think we talked about this last week, right? The golden age of gaming. But it actually is right now, because for the most part, you can play all the games that have been made and all the games that are being made, right? Yeah. So the golden age of gaming is right now, because you can go out and get the Banner Saga 1 and 2 if you do it right for free. And if not
the
for
accessibility to all of the games from earlier consoles is one of the major differences between today and like 15 years ago. Where it was like you had to keep those consoles, you had to keep those games. If you had to move, you had to protect that stuff. You had to like quadruple wrap that thing to make sure that your Nintendo survived.
Right. I've got in my PlayStation cart, I've got for $16, I think, Valkyrie Chronicles. The original.
Yeah. Well,
4.
I would say
it's got 2 games for $16 that I've never had a chance and I've always been interested in. And now I can pick them up for the price of 2 cups of Starbucks coffee. Are you kidding me? We live in the
Valkyrie Chronicles is easily one of my favorite franchises ever.
Really? See,
the artwork is unbelievable. It gets significantly better when you get to 4. The gameplay is so good, and then the stories are always good. The characters are rich. Dude, Valkyrie Chronicles they're really popular now, so I didn't really think of it as underrated, but it would absolutely count, man. Especially the 4th game. It is
yeah.
Please don't die.
All right. And I think that may be the best place to end, unless we've got any others that come to mind. Like I said, I'm sure we'll wrap up and think of several others, because over the
15 game list we tweet in 5 minutes, you'll know.
Exactly right. But hang out with us, continue to let us know your favorites. We really do appreciate everyone. With the comment section has been absolutely on fire today on the YouTube, on the DNVR Gaming Twitter channel, and on our Twitch. Make sure you're following us on Twitch, DNVR_sports. Really do appreciate all that. Make sure you're subscribed to the DNVR Gaming podcast so that you don't miss an episode. Go back and listen to any of the ones that you've missed, because we always enjoy it. And next week, we're going to be talking about our games of the year, but our version of games of the year. And we may be able to pull in a few other DNVR members for a special treat for you to talk about some of their favorite experiences in gaming this year. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. We always appreciate it. Those of you that know that it's Friday, that also means it's Mandalorian Day at the DNVR. We're doing the live watch at 8 o'clock tonight with the podcast at 9 o'clock to follow. We'll appreciate hanging out with all of you for that. Really appreciate hanging out with all of you for this. For Rudo and AJ, I've been Drew Kreisman. This has been the DNVR Gaming Podcast, and we will see you next time.